The day cooperation became compulsion. Steward Machine Company versus Davis and the constitutional turning point in America. It's June 28th, 2026. Welcome to yes2hellwith.com. There are Supreme Court decisions that affect a single lawsuit. There are decisions that affect an entire generation. And then there are decisions that quietly reshape the constitutional relationship between the people, the states, and the federal government. One of those decisions is Steward Machine Company versus Davis. Most Americans have never heard of it, yet they live with its consequences every day. To understand why, we must travel back to 1937. America was in the depths of the Great Depression. Businesses were failing. Unemployment was widespread. Families were suffering. The country desperately wanted solutions. Congress responded with what became known as the Social Security Act. Part of that legislation created a nationwide unemployment compensation system. But there was a constitutional problem. The federal government is not a government of unlimited power. The Constitution delegates specific powers. Everything else is reserved. So Congress faced an important question. How do you create a national unemployment system without directly controlling the states? The answer was remarkably clever. Congress imposed a federal unemployment tax upon employers, but then it made an offer. If a state established its own unemployment compensation program that met federal standards, employers within that state would receive a substantial credit against the federal tax. At first glance, that sounds voluntary. No state was literally commanded to participate. No governor was forced to sign legislation. No legislature was ordered to comply. Justice Benjamin Cardozo, writing for the Supreme Court, concluded that this was constitutional. He described it as cooperation rather than coercion. And for nearly 90 years, that decision has stood as one of the constitutional foundations of cooperative federalism. But now let us ask a different question. Not the question Cardozo asked, the question the Liberty Dialogue system asks. When does cooperation become compulsion? Imagine someone says to you, you are completely free to refuse. But if you refuse, you will suffer enormous financial consequences. Are you truly free then? Legally, perhaps. Practically, perhaps not. That distinction lies at the heart of the Liberty Dialogue's analysis. The Liberty Dialogue system does not begin with policy. It begins with authority, jurisdiction, status, standing, obligation, enforcement, application, presumption. Every constitutional analysis begins there. Before discussing unemployment, before discussing economics, before discussing compassion or public policy, the first question is always the same. Where is the constitutional authority? Not, would this help the people? Not, is this good public policy? And certainly not, does this nation face a crisis? Those are important questions, but they are not constitutional questions. The Constitution exists precisely because good intentions are not enough, and sometimes they are deeply flawed. Every government in history has believed it was acting for the public good. The question is not whether government seeks good results. The question is whether government possesses delegated authority to pursue those results in the manner chosen. Cardozo approached the problem differently. His analysis largely assumed the existence of congressional authority under the taxing and spending clause, and then considered whether Congress had crossed the constitutional line into coercion. The Liberty Dialogue system asks an earlier question. Has the authority itself first been demonstrated? That difference changes the entire conversation. Because once authority is presumed rather than proven, Everything that follows rests upon that presumption. Notice what happened after Steward Machine. The federal government discovered something extraordinary. Direct commands were often unnecessary. Financial incentives could achieve the same result. If Washington wanted states to move in a particular direction, it did not always need to mandate the compliance that was needed. It could attach money. It could attach grants or tax advantages. It could attach funding. And over time, those financial incentives became one of the principal methods by which national policy spread throughout the country. Supporters call that cooperation. Critics often describe it as practical coercion. The Liberty Dialogue system asks neither side to begin with labels. It asks for proof. Where is the delegated authority? Where is the constitutional limit? Who bears the burden of establishing them? Those questions come first. This is where the philosophical difference becomes profound. Cardozo trusted judicial judgment to distinguish encouragement from coercion. The Liberty Dialogue system trusts constitutional limitation before judicial discretion. Cardozo asks whether government has acted reasonably. The Liberty Dialogue system asks whether government has demonstrated lawful authority. Those are entirely different starting points. History teaches a remarkable lesson. Government seldom acquires great power through dramatic revolutions. It acquires greater power through accepted precedents. One decision, one exception, one new interpretation, one crisis, one emergency, one practical solution, until eventually what once appeared extraordinary becomes ordinary. The question is no longer whether government possesses the power. The question becomes how government should exercise the power everyone has already assumed exists. That is precisely why the Liberty Dialogue system insists upon beginning with authority. Because once the first question is skipped, the remaining questions become increasingly difficult to answer. Authority, then jurisdiction, then status, then standing, then application, obligation, enforcement, all under the umbrella of presumption. Reverse that order and constitutional analysis gives way to administrative reasoning. Now let me be perfectly clear. This discussion is not about whether unemployment insurance is good or bad. Reasonable people may disagree about public policy. This is not today's discussion. Today's discussion is about constitutional method. Should courts begin by asking whether a governmental program is wise, or should they first ask whether the Constitution delegates the authority being exercised? The Liberty Dialogue system answers without hesitation. Authority comes first, always, because constitutional government does not survive through good intentions. It survives through defined limitations. When limitations become flexible, government becomes flexible. When government becomes flexible, power expands. And when power expands without first requiring proof of constitutional authority, liberty quietly recedes. That is why Steward Machine Company versus Davis remains one of the most important constitutional decisions in American history. Not merely because of what it decided, but because of the constitutional method it illustrates. One method begins with government objectives, the other begins with constitutional delegation. One begins with policy, the other begins with authority. The Liberty Dialogue system chooses authority. Because free people deserve more than assurances that government means well. They deserve proof that government possesses the constitutional authority to act in the first place. And perhaps that is the most important constitutional question any generation can ask. And as always, may truth reign supreme.